Let's move now to this story. Universities in the United States have come under the spotlight as anti-war protests spread across the country. Students are expressing solidarity with Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, and they are calling on the universities to disclose and divest their investments in companies that are linked to Israel and its war in Gaza. How far-reaching is the political impact of these student protests? We now speak to Dr. Gideon Chitanga, who's a researcher at the African Center for the Study of the USA. He now joins us live. Dr. Chitanga, good morning. Thank you so much for making time for us. What's your reading into what's currently playing out in these universities? And do American universities have a history of solidarity protest?
Yes, absolutely. I think anti-war protests are generally something close to a norm in Western Europe. The most famous protests were the protests against the Vietnamese war in the US. The context is different. Then it was more a war that was rooted in contradictory ideological views between the US and communist Vietnam. The current issue of Gaza, it is a slightly different dynamic in the sense that the world is shocked, I think, at the atrocities that are continuously being committed by Israel in Gaza. The second thing is there is a huge sense of awareness of the discourse around human rights and humanitarianism, and more and more it looks to me like the younger generation in the US, they relate politically in a different way. They see Israel in a politically different way than the older generation who are mostly within the political class in the US. And that is very interesting because large and large, this tells you that the perception and the view of the common person, including in a Western country, about what Israel is doing in Gaza and its historical role vis-a-vis the conflict in Gaza is shifting, and increasingly the current Israel regime under Netanyahu is looking more as an aggressor, more as a colonial violator of human rights that is denying the people of Gaza their right to self-determination and national sovereignty. And I think this is the major issue. So although other political issues are emerging in this context, I think what is clear is that the students are saying no to human rights violations, no to denial of food and livelihood basics to the Palestinians, and they are demanding a permanent solution to the conflict in Gaza, which might mean that the Palestine has to be recognized as a state, and the people of Gaza have to, and the whole Palestine actually, have to be allowed their right to self-determination and national sovereignty. And the fact that there is urgent need for peace between Israel, peaceful coexistence between Israel and Palestine, and peace in the Middle East region.
Yeah, what I find interesting as well is the call from students around disinvesting in Israel, and particularly because I don't know if you remember the story of the US billionaire Bill Ackman, who was essentially pushing for action to be taken against the then president of Harvard, Claudine Gay, because he actually argued that there is this environment of anti-Semitism that had been allowed on the Harvard campuses. Eventually, of course, she resigned, although it was related to plagiarism. But some people are saying that money is also at play here.
Yes, money is at play. But what is interesting, if you look at it closely, is the fact that the groups of students who are protesting, they are ordinary people. Then there is an issue about these elite power brokers who control financial flows within the US and control capital within the universities, and obviously influence the investment flows by the universities. And by the way, they are very important. They play a very important role because for universities to survive, they need investment, they need to save, they need money for research. Unfortunately, you have a situation where these elite business interests have a powerful hold on research institutions or universities at large, and they influence policy. What also struck me is the failure to realize a momentous historical shift by these powerful elite interests or businesses who control universities, in the sense that the messaging from the students, it's simple, it's very clear. We don't want war. We don't want our taxpayers' money to be paying for bombs and continuous killing. We don't want universities that we academically and intellectually, culturally and ideologically identify with to be seen to be associated with genocide. That's a very simple message. But you have these power brokers and political elites across the Republican Party and the Democratic Party reducing the whole discourse to anti-Semitism, which is basically falsifying the narrative to say that Jewish students are under threat. No, I think that there is a huge issue of intellectual repression and politicization and securitization of debates and universities when it comes to this issue. And unfortunately, it is these elite, powerful power brokers, economic brokers who are sort of acting like authoritarian actors that we commonly see in African countries.
Yeah, one of the professors at Harvard wrote an opinion piece in saying that I'm a Harvard professor. The extremism of a student protesters reminds me of the worst I saw as an undergraduate in the 1960s. Because here's the thing about it also is that you have, as they say, why can't activists be idealistic but not hateful, selfless but not self-righteous? And who decides that? Who decides what is hateful? Who decides what is actually a call that says that let's ensure that the human rights of the people who live in Palestine are also protected?
I would say that the professor, with due respect, is ideologically right-wing and intolerant. I think there is nothing as hateful as tolerating the killing of more than 30,000 people, seeing the scale of starvation and famine that is happening in Gaza and Palestine. And by the way, UN organs have said this repeatedly. Yesterday, I think it's Mrs. McCain. She spoke about this, and even us viewers who are very much far away from the geographic space that we are discussing, you cannot avoid the shock and the sense of desperation, just thinking, how can this happen in the modern age? There is need for the U.S. To come closer to a different emotion of politics associated with the marginalized people, and to understand this point as a very momentous point in history. And I'm glad that students who are usually sort of very much a spark of light generationally in terms of identifying with societal shifts in the U.S. are raising a critical issue. And I hope that in the future, this can play a major role in reshaping American policy towards Israel, towards Palestine and globally.
Yeah, and I think it's globally, as you say as well, because if you look at what has happened here in South Africa, UCT, for instance, the Senate concluding on a motion that was brought around boycotting academic institutions linked to Israel, which actually fell short of the votes that were required. What do you make then of what's playing out here in South Africa?
Certainly, there is a huge consciousness in South Africa, but what you see is the distance between the ordinary people. The students generally represents the different set of households, right, and the views that are broadly identify or associate with the ordinary people. And once you go to the upper echelons of the structures of power within the city, then the influence of capital and traditions, historical ideas that are propagated start to take a major influence, because this is how these institutions of learning are structured. And unfortunately, my sense of academics and academic institutions is that they should be politically apathetic and try to be objective. Their policies be informed by research and critical thinking and freedom of speech and ideas. And but all these things, when we come to practical issues, they are just theories and ideas, because at some point, if someone is somewhere who has a lot of money, who controls politics and determines the course and direction of universities, and where universities are supposed to take a critical position and say society is regressing, we can't be living in this century and be associated with the kind of butchering and battering that is happening in Palestine. We need even research to realize that if they cannot identify with progressive ideas, then we would rather not identify with their money. Yeah. But this is not happening because university administrators want the money. At the end of the day, their research outcomes and impacts are measured on the basis of the level of investment they have to sustain research. And at the end, they need to what the power brokers tell them.
Yeah, and I know sometimes we forget that the power struggles that are sometimes at play at institutions and universities, in this particular case, where knowledge is being generated, that there are these interests also that are in place, and also the push and pull factors. But I quickly want to go back to the US as we conclude the conversation. Earlier on, you said that that Palestine must be recognized as a country. There was that motion that was brought before the United Nations Security Council earlier again this year, and it was the United States that abstained, well, the United States rather, that vetoed that and said that no, actually they disagree that Palestine should be recognized as a country and a member of the United Nations. But then on top of that, also considering the outcomes of the primaries in the United States with the unconfirmed voters, these are the anti-war voters. How do you see that play out for US President Joe Biden's attempt to get a second term?
The conflict in Gaza is obviously a major domestic political issue in the US at various levels. We already have had Congress leaders running into universities. Donald Trump has expressed a position that I would say is almost like parroting right-wing politics in Israel. I think Biden is under pressure to bridge various police positions and appear as a progressive. So clearly there's so much pressure. But also you have other Western countries, I think Spain, I think Australia, and a few others who are exactly now saying the permanent solution to the conflict